Welcome to the Daily News Currents. Today is Wednesday, January 8th, and for today's headlines we have: Man who exploded Cybertruck in Las Vegas used ChatGPT in planning, police say. McDonald's says it's revising some of its diversity practices. Blaze turns Pacific Palisades into evacuation zone. Trump floats using force to take Greenland and the Panama Canal. AI startup Anthropic is in talks that could value it at $60 billion. Man who exploded Cybertruck in Las Vegas used ChatGPT in planning, police say. The highly decorated soldier who exploded a Tesla Cybertruck outside the Trump Hotel in Las Vegas used generative AI, including ChatGPT, to help plan the attack, Las Vegas police said Tuesday. A laptop, cell phone, and watch are still under review nearly a week after 37-year-old Matthew Livesberger fatally shot himself just before the truck blew up. An investigation in Livesberger's searches through ChatGPT indicate he was looking for information on explosive targets, the speed at which certain rounds of ammunition would travel, and whether fireworks were legal in Arizona. Kevin McCauley, sheriff of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, called the use of generative AI a game changer and said the department was sharing information with other law enforcement agencies. This is the first incident that I'm aware of on U.S. soil where ChatGPT is utilized to help an individual build a particular device, he said. It's a concerning moment. During a roughly half-hour-long news conference, Las Vegas police and federal law enforcement officials unveiled new details about the New Year Day explosion. Among the details, law enforcement disclosed Livesberger stopped during the drive to Las Vegas to pour racing-grade fuel into the Cybertruck, which then dripped the substance. The vehicle was loaded with 60 pounds of pyrotechnic material, and the officials are still uncertain exactly what detonated the explosion, but said it could have been the flash from the firearm that Livesberger used to fatally shoot himself. Livesberger, an Army Green Beret who deployed twice to Afghanistan and lived in Colorado Springs, Colorado, left notes saying the explosion was a stunt meant to be a wake-up call for the nation's troubles, officials said last week. He left a cell phone note saying he needed to cleanse his mind of the brothers I've lost and to relieve myself of the burden of the lives I took. The explosion caused minor injuries to several people, but virtually no damage to the Trump International Hotel. Authorities said that Livesberger acted alone. Livesberger's letters touched on political grievances, societal problems, and domestic and international issues, including the war in Ukraine. He wrote that the U.S. was terminally ill and headed towards collapse. Investigators have been trying to determine if Livesberger wanted to make a political point, giving the Tesla and the hotel bearing the president-elect's name. Livesberger harbored no ill will towards President-elect Donald Trump, law enforcement officials say, but one of the notes he left, he said the country needed to rally around him and the Tesla CEO, Elon Musk. McDonald's says it's revising some of its diversity practices. McDonald's says it's changing some of its inclusion standards, becoming the largest company to announce it's rolling back some of its diversity practices. In its statement, the company said it will no longer set aspirational representation goals and instead focus on continuing to embed inclusion practices that grow its business. Additionally, it is temporarily suspending external surveys to shift its focus internally, the company said. It is also changing the name of its diversity team to the Global Inclusion Team and retiring supply chain's mutual commitment to DEI pledge in favor of a more integrated discussion with suppliers about inclusion as it relates to business performance. In making the announcement on Monday, the U.S. multinational restaurant chain became the latest to shift its practices on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. Last November, Walmart said it would roll back some of its DEI policies. McDonald's says it has made several strides towards being more inclusive, including having more than 30% of its U.S. leadership executives coming from underrepresented backgrounds. It also says it has the highest number of new diverse franchisee applicants in its history. Everyone is welcome under our golden arches, and this broad-based appeal is why McDonald's is one of the world's most beloved brands, the company says. We're proud of our culture at McDonald's, and we want to thank all of you for living our values. Blaze turned Pacific Palisades into evacuation zone. Cars clogged scenic Sunset Boulevard and headed away from the Palisades, a seaside neighborhood on the west side of Los Angeles. Against a towering backdrop of black smoke with an ominous orange glow, the stately homes and broad boulevards of the Pacific Palisades looked small and exposed on Tuesday. The fire forced residents, including some celebrities, to flee the seaside neighborhood, which is on the west side of Los Angeles. The scenic Sunset Boulevard became an escape route. Cars clogged the road on Tuesday, all headed away from the Pacific Palisades except for the emergency vehicles that wheeled their way towards the blaze. In one hilly neighborhood just southeast of the fire, a wall of smoke loomed overhead. Olga Arango, 66, had been at work cleaning a home there. The owners were out of town when she decided that it was time to go. I saw on my phone that we had to evacuate, Miss Arango said in Spanish. As she packed her car and considered her best route home to Van Nuys, California, I didn't finish, but I can come back tomorrow. In the Palisades Highlands, a neighborhood at the edge of Topanga State Park, that means that escape were very limited. There's basically one road into the Highlands and one road out, said Melissa Grant, a lawyer who lives in a wood-frame townhouse there. Miss Grant, 69, tried to use that road, Palisades Drive, on Tuesday to reach safety with her dog Abby, but then a nearby elementary school caught fire, sending flames dancing into the roadway and forcing her to turn her car around. Afraid to go home, Miss Grant tried her luck on a local fire road, but it had become a dead end, blocked by locks and chains. So Miss Grant found shelter with nearby homeowners, who seemed distant enough from the flames, at least for the moment. You can see the fire and smoke right there. Oh wow, there's a helicopter, she said, speaking by phone from the home that was not hers. It's scary. Trump floats using force to take Greenland and the Panama Canal. In an hour-long news conference in his Florida club Mar-a-Lago, the president-elect delivered a hodgepodge of grievances, complaints, and false claims. President-elect Donald J. Trump refused on Tuesday to rule out the use of military or economic coercion to force Panama to give up control of the canal that America built more than a century ago, and to push Denmark to sell Greenland to the United States. In a rambling hour-long news conference, Mr. Trump repeatedly returned to the theme of American sacrifice in building the canal and accused China, falsely, of operating it today. When pressed on the question of whether he might order the military to force Panama to give it up, in violation of treaties and other agreements reached during the Carter administration, or to do the same with Greenland, he said, "No, I can assure you on either of those two. We need them for economic security. The Panama Canal was built for our military," he said. Asked again if he would rule out the use of military force, he said, "I'm not going to commit to that. You might have to do something." Mr. Trump's statements propelled his repeated calls for expanding American territory to a new level, one that is bound to roil 3 American allies: Panama, Denmark, which handles Greenland's foreign and security affairs, and Canada, which he has mocked as America's 51st state. On Tuesday, he made clear, though, that he was not joking, suggesting that if Canada remained a sovereign state, the financial cost to its trading relationship with the United States could be crushing. Perhaps Mr. Trump was posturing for a negotiating advantage. Yet, not since the days of William McKinley, who engaged in the Spanish-American War in the late 19th century and ended up with U.S. control of the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico, has an American president-elect so blatantly threatened the use of force to expand the country's territorial boundaries. It was a reminder that Mr. Trump's definition of America first is anything but isolationist. He comes to American foreign policy with the mind of a real estate developer with a penchant for grabbing territory. He insisted he would not be deterred by the treaty signed with Panama, which was ratified by the Senate in 1978 by 68 to 32, just beyond the 2/3 vote required by the Constitution. He asserted that the return of control of the canal to Panama was a bad idea, arguing that he was reluctant to say so while the nation was burying former President Jimmy Carter. who negotiated the deal. He then returned repeatedly to criticizing Mr. Carter's judgment. He was a very fine person, Mr. Trump said, but that was a big mistake, he added. It will cost us the equivalent of $1 trillion. On Canada, Mr. Trump, when pressed, threatened to use economic force, not the military, to join Canada and the United States together, implying that the United States would pare back its purchases of Canadian products. He declared that he would use tariffs to hamper Canada's ability to assemble cars and sell them in the United States, and then charged that Canada contributed insufficiently to American defenses. He made no reference to NORAD, the combined American and Canadian defense effort that is considered a military model for an interoperable joint military early warning system run equally by the two allies. It is, at the core, an American air and missile defense. He continued to push on Tuesday evening, posting maps on social media showing Canada as part of the United States. He also said at the news conference that he would tariff Denmark at a very high level if it did not give Greenland to the United States, before casting doubt on whether Denmark has a legitimate claim to Greenland at all. The threats, vague and uninformed as they may be, were only part of the series of declarations Mr. Trump made about his plans when he took office in less than 2 weeks. He said the Gulf of Mexico would be renamed the Gulf of America, although it was unclear how serious he was about the effort. He declared that members of NATO, who were slow to fulfill a commitment to spend 2% of their gross domestic product on defense, should now prepare for a world in which they need to spend 5%. They can all afford it, but they should be at 5%, not 2%, he said, before again threatening to not defend any NATO ally who did not, in his view, pay into the system sufficiently. Mr. Putin has used such threats in the past to sow divisions within NATO, an alliance he has been loath to take on directly, even as it helps arm Ukraine. Mr. Trump's critique of NATO isn't a solitary one. Presidents George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Biden have all pressed the case, and the most progress in meeting the 2% goal has come in Mr. Biden's term. In fact, he celebrated at the NATO summit in Washington in July during the 75th anniversary of the alliance. And even some European leaders, when speaking privately, say they agree that the goal should be moved to 3% if Europe is going to have any hope of assembling the military might to deter Russia in coming decades. They often add that there is no political constituency for spending at that level. But they may be driven there by necessity if they become convinced that the United States will not come to their aid. I would have loved to say yes, or protect you even if you don't pay, but that's not how life works, Mr. Trump told reporters. Mr. Trump also reiterated his threat that all hell will break out in the Middle East if the hostages being held by Hamas are not released by Inauguration Day, repeating the threat 4 times. But it was Mr. Trump's views on American territorial expansionism that were most striking in the news conference and so untethered from international law. In December, when Mr. Trump ramped up his calls for the purchase of Greenland and voiced his complaints about how American shipping was treated as it traversed the Panama Canal, Ian Bremmer of the Eurasia Group noted that the case Mr. Trump was making had echoes of the justifications President Vladimir V. Putin of Russia made for invading Ukraine. By piecing together Mr. Trump's series of social media posts on these issues and hearing his complaints at his private Florida club, Mar-a-Lago, one thing is clear. He's building a national security case for why an American takeover of Greenland and the Panama Canal Zone is necessary. He noted on Tuesday that Chinese and Russian ships were appearing around Greenland, an apparent showing of the country's growing interest in shorter polar shipping and military routes after global warming loosened and shrank ice fields, making them more passable. He argued that China, which controls 2 ports near the canal, was operating the canal itself. It is not. After Mr. Trump responded to the resignation of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on Monday by writing on social media that many people in Canada love being the 51st state, Mr. Bremmer noted in a post on X that American imperialism is so back. In fact, it often sounded that way at the news conference, as Mr. Trump dismissed the declarations of Denmark's leadership that Greenland is not up for sale, and similar comments from Panama. The only question now is whether he's increasing the pressure for negotiating purposes or would actually make good on his threats. AI startup Anthropic is in talks that could value it at $60 billion. The financing efforts follow new funding rounds by Elon Musk's xAI and the market leader OpenAI, which is now valued at $157 billion. The San Francisco artificial intelligence startup Anthropic is in talks to raise a new round of funding that could value the company at $60 billion, up from about $16 billion less than a year ago, according to two people with knowledge of the discussions. Led by the venture capital firm Lightspeed Venture Partners, the new round could pump an additional $2 billion from the company into the company, said the people, who spoke on a conditional of anonymity. Since its founding in 2021, Anthropic has raised more than $11.3 billion from the venture firms like Menlo Park Ventures and tech giants like Amazon, Google, and Salesforce. The talks come amid a new surge in the funding for the industry's most prominent AI startups. Last month, Elon Musk's xAI raised $6 billion in a deal that valued the company at $35 billion to $45 billion. In October, OpenAI, the maker of the online chatbot ChatGPT, raised $6.6 billion at a $157 billion valuation. OpenAI started the AI boom in late 2022 with the release of ChatGPT, setting off a funding surge that moved billions into the wide range of startups. Enthusiasm among investors for AI companies cooled by the summer of 2024 has several high-profile startups were essentially folded into tech giants like Google and Amazon. But as companies like OpenAI and Anthropic have continued to improve their technology, interest among investors have regained steam. The New York Times has sued OpenAI and Microsoft, accusing them of copyright infringement of news content related to AI systems. OpenAI and Microsoft have denied these claims. Lightspeed Ventures declined to comment on Anthropic's latest funding discussions. Details of the talks were reported earlier by the Wall Street Journal. After founding Anthropic, Dario Amodei, the company's chief executive, and his sister, Daniela Amodei, Anthropic's president, positioned the company as a startup that would build AI with guardrails. Like several others on the company's founding team, they had left OpenAI after disagreements with company leadership over how its technologies were being funded and released through Microsoft. In a podcast interview in 2023, Mr. Omodei said there was a 10 to 25% chance that AI technology could destroy humanity. But in October, he struck a more optimistic tone, publishing a 14,000-word essay on the potential benefits of AI technologies. I think that most people are underestimating just how radical the upside of AI could be, just as I think most people are underestimating how bad the risks could be, he wrote. The next month, Anthropic raised $4 billion from Amazon, its largest investor, which has put a total of $8 billion into the startup. Anthropic builds and operates its technologies using computer data centers owned by Amazon and Google. That is all that we have for today. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye!